The day my Aunt Catherine died, my cousin Jennifer looked me up and down at the funeral and said, "I don't know why you even bothered coming. You know you're not in the will, right?" 1 week later, at the will reading, when the lawyer said my name and revealed what I'd inherited, Jennifer's face went so pale I thought she might actually faint. And honestly, after everything they'd put me and my aunt through, watching them implode was the most satisfying moment of my entire life. But let me back up, because you need to understand the whole story to appreciate just how perfect this karma really was. My Aunt Catherine was my mother's older sister. She was 78 when she died, sharp as a tack until the very end, and worth approximately $8 million. She'd made her money the old-fashioned way. She and her late husband built a successful chain of hardware stores across the Midwest, sold them to a national company in the 90s, and invested wisely. Uncle Paul had died about 10 years ago, and they'd never had children, so Aunt Catherine lived alone in her beautiful home in suburban Chicago, spending her time gardening, reading, and traveling. I loved her. Not because of her money. I genuinely had no idea how wealthy she was until much later, but because she was funny and kind and told the best stories. She'd been a librarian before she and Uncle Paul started the hardware business, and she still had that librarian energy, quiet but observant, soft-spoken but firm when she needed to be. I'd visit her about once a month, sometimes more. I lived about 45 minutes away, and I'd drive over on Saturday afternoons. We'd have tea in her garden, or I'd help her with little projects around the house, or we'd just sit and talk. She'd tell me stories about my mom when they were kids, about her travels with Uncle Paul, about books she'd read. I'd tell her about my job as a social worker, about the kids I was trying to help, about my life. It wasn't complicated. I just enjoyed her company. My cousins, on the other hand, had a very different relationship with Aunt Catherine. There were 3 of them: Jennifer, Richard, and Marcus. They were the children of my mother's younger brother, Uncle Thomas, who died young in a car accident when I was a kid. Aunt Catherine had helped raise them after that, paying for their college educations, helping with down payments on their first homes, basically being the family's financial safety net. And they'd grown up entitled because of it. Jennifer was the oldest, 42, married to a corporate lawyer, lived in a McMansion in the suburbs. She drove a BMW, wore designer everything, and had strong opinions about everyone else's life choices. Her favorite hobby was posting on social media about her blessed life, while looking down on everyone who wasn't as financially successful as she was. Richard was 40, worked in finance, and was somehow even more insufferable than Jennifer. He'd show up to family gatherings in expensive suits and talk about his stock portfolio and his investments, and which country club had the best golf course. He'd married a woman named Clarissa who was basically a female version of him, all surface and no substance. Marcus was the youngest at 37, and honestly, he wasn't quite as bad as the other 2, but he went along with everything they did. He worked as a consultant for some tech company, made good money, and mostly just followed Jennifer's lead because it was easier than having his own opinion. Here's the thing about my cousins. They never visited Aunt Catherine because they cared about her. They visited because they wanted to stay in the will. It started getting really obvious about 5 years before Aunt Catherine died. I'd show up on a Saturday afternoon and find Jennifer already there, sitting in the living room, talking loudly about how busy her life was, but how she always made time for family. She'd brought some expensive gift basket from a gourmet store, the kind that cost $200 and looked impressive, but that Aunt Catherine would never actually eat because she didn't like fancy cheeses or imported crackers. "Oh, Emma," Jennifer would say, looking at the homemade cookies I'd brought. "How sweet. I'm sure Aunt Catherine will enjoy those." The implication being that my homemade cookies were somehow less valuable than her expensive store-bought basket. Aunt Catherine would just smile and thank us both, but I'd catch her rolling her eyes when Jennifer wasn't looking. It got worse over the years. Richard and Clarissa started coming by too, always bringing expensive gifts, always talking about how much they cared about Aunt Cat. She hated being called that, but Richard did it anyway. Marcus would tag along, quieter but clearly part of the same strategy. They'd compete with each other too. Jennifer would bring a $200 gift basket, so Richard would bring a $300 bottle of wine. Clarissa would arrange for flowers to be delivered weekly. Jennifer would hire a lawn service to maintain the garden. It became this ridiculous arms race of expensive gestures, none of which Aunt Catherine actually wanted or needed. Meanwhile, I'd show up with homemade cookies, or a book I thought she'd like, or sometimes just my time. I'd help her reorganize her library. I'd sit with her while she sorted through old photos. I'd listen to her stories about Uncle Paul and tell her she should write them down. "You're the only one who visits because you actually want to see me," Aunt Catherine said to me one day. We were sitting in her garden, drinking iced tea, watching the birds at her feeders. "Of course I want to see you," I said. "You're my favorite person." "Your cousins want to see my bank account," she said dryly. "It's not the same thing." I didn't know what to say to that. It felt wrong to badmouth them, even though she was absolutely right. "Emma," she said, turning to look at me, "do you know how much money I have?" "No," I said honestly, "and I don't need to know." "Exactly," she said, smiling. "That's exactly my point." About 2 years before she died, Aunt Catherine's health started declining. Nothing catastrophic, just the normal wear and tear of being in your late 70s. Her knees bothered her. She got tired more easily. Her doctor recommended she start thinking about long-term care options. That's when my cousins really ramped things up. Jennifer started calling Aunt Catherine every single day, not to chat, but to subtly remind her of all the ways she was helping. "I've researched the best senior living facilities in the area, Aunt Catherine. I can send you the information. I've spoken to an estate lawyer friend of mine about updating your will. You should really have everything in order." Richard hired a financial advisor and tried to convince Aunt Catherine to let him optimize her portfolio. Aunt Catherine, who'd successfully managed millions of dollars for decades, told him she was perfectly capable of handling her own finances, but Richard kept pushing. Clarissa tried to convince Aunt Catherine to sell her house and move into a senior apartment. "You don't need all this space. Think of how much easier it would be." Never mind that Aunt Catherine loved her house and had no interest in leaving it. Marcus was the only one who actually listened when Aunt Catherine said she was happy where she was, but he didn't contradict his siblings either. They were circling like vultures, and everyone could see it. I kept visiting like I always had. Saturday afternoons, tea in the garden. Sometimes I'd bring dinner and we'd watch old movies. Nothing changed for me because nothing needed to change. I wasn't trying to get anything from her. I just wanted to spend time with her while I still could. "You know they're going to be furious with you," Aunt Catherine said to me one afternoon, about 6 months before she died. "Furious about what?" I asked. "When they find out," she said, smiling mysteriously. "Find out what?" "You'll see," she said, patting my hand. "You'll see." Aunt Catherine died on a Tuesday morning in late September. Heart attack, quick and painless, exactly the way she would have wanted to go. She'd been working in her garden, deadheading roses, and she just stopped. The neighbor found her an hour later, looking peaceful, her gardening gloves still on. I got the call from Jennifer. "Aunt Catherine is dead," she said, no preamble, no emotion in her voice. "The funeral is Saturday. I assume you'll want to come." "Of course I'm coming," I said, my voice breaking. She was. "We're handling all the arrangements," Jennifer interrupted. "You don't need to worry about anything. We've got it covered." "Can I help with?" "No," she said firmly. "We're family, we'll take care of it." The implication being that I somehow wasn't family enough to be involved. I hung up and cried for an hour, not just because Aunt Catherine was gone, but because I knew what the next few weeks were going to be like. My cousins acting like they were the only ones who'd ever cared about her, rewriting history, claiming a relationship with her that had been purely transactional. The funeral was at an expensive funeral home that Jennifer had chosen. Everything was over the top. Elaborate flower arrangements, expensive casket, catered reception afterward at some fancy venue. It was exactly the kind of funeral Aunt Catherine would have hated. She'd wanted something simple, maybe a memorial service in her garden, donations to the library instead of flowers. But Jennifer had other ideas. Aunt Catherine deserves the best, Jennifer said loudly at the reception, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. We wanted to give her a send-off that reflected how much we loved her. I stood in the corner, wearing a simple black dress I'd bought at Target, watching my cousins work the room like they were at a networking event. Richard was talking about how he'd been so close to Aunt Catherine, how they'd had such deep conversations about life and death. Clarissa was sobbing dramatically into her designer purse. Marcus was accepting condolences like he was the primary mourner. I'd brought a framed photo of Aunt Catherine in her garden, one I'd taken last spring when the roses were blooming. She'd been laughing at something I'd said, her hands dirty from planting, looking genuinely happy. I'd wanted to put it near the casket, but Jennifer had said it didn't match the aesthetic. So I just held on to it. After the service, at the reception, Jennifer cornered me near the bathroom. I don't know why you even bothered coming, she said, looking me up and down with barely concealed contempt. You know you're not in the will, right? Aunt Catherine left everything to us, the people who actually took care of her. I came because I loved her, I said quietly. Please, Jennifer scoffed. You came hopping for a handout, but you're wasting your time. There's nothing for you. Aunt Catherine knew who really cared about her, and it wasn't the person who showed up with grocery store cookies. Those were homemade, I said. Even worse, she said, walking away. So cheap. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Aunt Catherine's lawyer's office in downtown Chicago. I almost didn't go. Jennifer had made it clear I wasn't wanted, and honestly, I didn't care about the money. Whatever Aunt Catherine left to my cousins, they'd probably spend on more designer handbags and golf club memberships anyway. But then I got a personal call from the lawyer, a man named Mr. Hendricks. Ms. Pierce, he said, I need you to be present at the will reading. It's not optional. Your aunt specifically requested your attendance. But my cousins said. I don't care what your cousins said, Mr. Hendricks said firmly. Your aunts will specifically names you and you need to be there. Tuesday at 2 p.m. Don't be late. So I went. The law office was one of those old money places with dark wood paneling and leather chairs and paintings of stern-looking men who were probably long-dead judges. Mr. Hendricks was in his mid-60s, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of lawyer who'd probably been doing estate law for 40 years, and had seen every kind of family drama imaginable. My cousins were already there when I arrived. Jennifer, Richard, Clarissa, and Marcus, all dressed like they were going to a high-stakes business meeting. Jennifer had her Hermes bag. Richard was wearing cufflinks that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Clarissa had fresh highlights and perfect makeup. Marcus was in a designer suit. I was wearing the same Target dress I'd worn to the funeral. When I walked into the conference room, Jennifer actually laughed. You actually showed up, she said. Emma, this is embarrassing. You're not in the will. This is just going to be awkward for everyone. Mr. Hendricks called me, I said, taking a seat at the end of the long conference table. He said I needed to be here. He probably just wants all family members present for legal reasons, Richard said dismissively. Don't get your hopes up. You're not getting anything. I'm not here for money, I said. Obviously, Clarissa said, looking at my dress with barely concealed disdain. Because you clearly need it. They all laughed, actually laughed, while we were there to discuss their dead aunt's estate. Mr. Hendricks walked in, carrying a thick folder and a leather-bound document that I assumed was the will. He didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. He just sat down at the head of the table, opened the folder, and looked at us over his glasses. Thank you all for coming, he said. We're here to read the last will and testament of Catherine Marie Brennan, executed 6 months ago in my presence, completely sound of mind and under no duress. Before we begin, I want to make something very clear. This will is ironclad. Ms. Brennan was very specific about her wishes, and she anticipated that some of you might contest it. I strongly advise against that course of action. Jennifer and Richard exchanged glances. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Now, Mr. Hendricks continued, let's begin. He opened the leather-bound document and started reading. I, Catherine Marie Brennan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Standard legal language. My cousins were barely listening, probably already mentally spending their inheritance. To my beloved nephew Thomas Richard Brennan Jr., known as Richard, I leave the sum of $10,000. Richard's head snapped up. What, 10,000? That can't be right. This amount is given in recognition of his occasional visits, despite the fact that they were clearly motivated by financial interest rather than genuine affection. The room went completely silent. Clarissa grabbed Richard's arm. She can't, that's not. To Richard's wife, Clarissa Ann Brennan, I leave nothing, as she was never truly interested in knowing me as a person. Clarissa's mouth fell open. To my nephew Marcus Daniel Brennan, I leave $25,000, as he at least had the decency to be quiet about his greed. Marcus closed his eyes. $25,000 when they'd been expecting millions. Jennifer was sitting perfectly still, her face frozen, probably calculating what this meant for her own inheritance. To my niece Jennifer Ann Morrison, I leave the sum of $10,000. What? Jennifer stood up so fast her chair fell over. That's impossible. I took care of her. I called her every day. I arranged for her lawn service. Ms. Morrison, Mr. Hendricks said coldly, sit down or I'll have you removed from this office. Jennifer sat, her face bright red, her hands shaking. This amount is given in recognition of Jennifer's numerous visits, Mr. Hendricks continued reading, all of which were timed carefully to remind me of her generosity and to ensure her place in my will. She never once asked how I was feeling or what I needed. She only wanted to be seen as helpful. That is worth exactly $10,000. Jennifer looked like she was going to be sick. To Jennifer's husband, Robert Morrison, I leave nothing, as I found him to be pompous and boring. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. That was so perfectly Aunt Catherine. The remainder of my estate, Mr. Hendricks continued, including my home, its contents, all financial accounts, investments, and properties, totaling approximately $8 million, I leave to my niece Emma Louise Pierce. The room exploded. What? That's not possible. She can't do this. We'll contest it. This is fraud. Mr. Hendricks didn't even flinch. He just kept reading, his voice steady and calm while my cousins screamed. I leave this to Emma because, unlike her cousins, she never once asked me for anything. She visited because she enjoyed my company, not because she wanted a place in my will. She baked me cookies when she didn't have money for expensive gifts. She listened to my stories. She helped me in my garden not because she thought it would earn her an inheritance, but because she saw I needed help and she cared. I felt tears running down my face. Emma is the only member of my family who loved me for who I was, not for what I had. She never once mentioned my money. She never hinted that she expected anything from me. She just loved me. And that, I have learned, is the rarest and most valuable thing in the world. Jennifer lunged across the table at me. Literally lunged, her hands reaching for me, her face twisted with rage. You bitch, you manipulative little bitch. You planned this, you tricked her. Richard grabbed her, pulling her back. This isn't over, we're contesting this. This will is invalid. Mr. Hendricks stood up, his face stern. The will is completely valid. Ms. Brennan anticipated this reaction, which is why she had a psychiatric evaluation done 1 week before executing this document. She was found to be completely competent and of sound mind. She also recorded a video explaining her decision, which I'm prepared to show to any judge if you do contest this will. But I warn you, it will not reflect well on any of you. I don't care, Jennifer screamed. She's not getting $8 million. We took care of her. We deserve that money. You deserve exactly what she gave you, Mr. Hendricks said coldly. And Ms. Brennan was very clear about why. Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with Ms. Pierce privately about the estate details. This isn't over, Richard said, his voice shaking with rage. We will fight this. You don't deserve any of this. Maybe not, I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time. But Aunt Catherine thought I did, and that's all that matters to me. They did try to contest the will. Of course they did. They hired an expensive lawyer, claimed that Aunt Catherine had been mentally incompetent, that I'd manipulated her, that the will should be thrown out. It went on for 3 months. Mr. Hendricks had been prepared for all of it. He presented the psychiatric evaluation showing Aunt Catherine was completely sound of mind. He presented bank records showing I'd never received any money from her, never asked for any, never even discussed her finances with her. He presented testimony from Aunt Catherine's doctor, her neighbors, her friends at the library, all of whom confirmed that she was sharp and competent until the very end. And then he played the video. Aunt Catherine had recorded it in Mr. Hendricks' office, sitting in a leather chair, looking directly at the camera. "If you're watching this," she said, "it means my greedy nieces and nephews are contesting my will. I expected nothing less." She went on for 15 minutes, calmly and clearly explaining why she'd left her estate to me. She detailed every fake visit from Jennifer, every manipulative conversation with Richard, every expensive gift that came with strings attached. She explained that she'd tested them over the years, hinting that she was updating her will, watching them scramble to increase their visits and their gifts. "Emma never changed," she said on the video. "She visited me every month for 20 years. Same Emma when she thought I was a retired librarian living on a pension. Same Emma when she found out I was wealthy. She baked me cookies when she was broke. She spent time with me when she was busy. She loved me when I was healthy and when I was sick. That's real. Everything else is performance." She looked directly at the camera. "So no, I'm not incompetent. I'm not senile. I'm not confused. I know exactly what I'm doing. Emma gets everything because Emma earned it by being a decent human being. The rest of you can take your $10,000 or $25,000 and think about where you went wrong." The judge threw out the contest immediately. "That was a year ago. I live in Aunt Catherine's house now. I kept most of her furniture, her books, her garden exactly as she'd maintained it. I quit my social worker job. I loved it, but it was burning me out, and I've started a nonprofit focused on helping kids aging out of foster care. I'm funding it entirely myself with Aunt Catherine's money. That's what she would have wanted. I've donated to the library in her name. I've set up a scholarship fund for kids who want to study library science. I've traveled to some of the places she always told me about but never got to see. And I still bake chocolate chip cookies every Saturday, even though she's not here to eat them anymore. My cousins don't speak to me. Jennifer sent me one email after the will contest was dismissed, calling me every name you can imagine. I didn't respond. Richard tried to call once, asking if I'd be willing to share the inheritance more equitably since we were family. I said no. Marcus sent a message saying he understood why Aunt Catherine did what she did, and he was sorry for going along with Jennifer and Richard's behavior. I appreciated that, but I haven't heard from him since. I don't hate them. I don't even think about them much. I'm too busy living the life Aunt Catherine wanted me to have, doing work that matters, being the person she always believed I was. Last week I was in her garden, my garden now, deadheading the roses just like she used to do, and I found something. A small metal box buried near her favorite rose bush. Inside was a note in her handwriting. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means you've stuck around even after all the drama. Good. You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. The money doesn't matter. What matters is that you know how much you mattered to me. You were the daughter I never had, and loving you was one of the greatest joys of my life. Don't let the inheritance change you. Don't let their jealousy make you bitter. Just keep being exactly who you are, kind, genuine, and true. The garden is yours now. Take care of it. All my love. Aunt Catherine." I sat there in the dirt, holding that note, crying and laughing at the same time. So what's the moral of this story? I think Aunt Catherine said it best in her will. Real love is priceless, and it's obvious when it's missing. My cousins spent years performing affection, bringing expensive gifts, making grand gestures, all while keeping a careful tally of what they thought they were owed. They never once just sat with her and asked about her day. They never listened to her stories. They never cared about who she was beyond the number in her bank account. And in the end, she saw right through all of it. You can't fake genuine care. You can't manipulate your way into someone's heart. And you certainly can't buy real love with a $200 gift basket. I inherited $8 million, but that's not what I value most. What I value is knowing that Aunt Catherine saw me, really saw me, and loved me for exactly who I was. And that's worth more than any amount of money could ever be. Thanks for listening to my story. If you're dealing with greedy family members, or if you've ever questioned whether kindness and authenticity really matter in a world that often rewards performance over substance, I hope this story gave you some comfort. The people who matter see the truth, and the truth always wins in the end. Leave me a comment if this story resonated with you, or if you've experienced something similar. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story. Take care and remember, be genuine, be kind, and the right people will always see your value.